before we get into this, I'd like to get just a little background on you, Jerry, for the audience, because
yes,
your background in technology and IP and understanding cultural and social nuances from your Black Panther background, all of those things combined to me make you really an interesting individual to speak with pertaining to this topic, because you have such clear parallels and experience on which to expound, a better direction. So if you could give us a background in that direction, it'd be awesome.
cool. So the 25 words or less elevator pitch. In December I turned 70. So I was born in 53, high school class of 72. So I grew up smoking 15. I grew up smoking Thai stick, Disraeli Leos, and Jamaican and real hashish, charas, et cetera, mostly because of the war in Vietnam sent a bunch of Americans who'd never seen or experienced cannabis overseas to that heirloom motherlode, and they sent it back, they brought it back, and the culture came with it. So I had experience in the import and distribution business in high school, which had resulted in my first Thanksgiving away from my family. This would have been 73. I was in Tucson with the people who'd been sending me things in Ohio. That was a trippy dinner. So I ended up going to acupuncture school in Boston in 80 to 83 and moved to Seattle to relocate my acupuncture practice because there were two schools in Boston and way too many people trying to get the limited customer base. I had worked for a high-tech startup, a software startup in Boston. The laws were passed, but there was that catch-22. Without an acupuncturist who had a license, who writes the exam and who grades the exam? And I came out to look at Seattle, and those who were out here a year ahead of me, people who had been in school a year ahead of me, oh, no. The time you get here, we'll have this all figured out. Well, that didn't happen for a couple of years. So I went back to working in high tech. Eventually, Aldous in the early PageMaker days, and my dear friend Ben Bauermeister hired me for a better job than I interviewed for. And I learned to program PostScript, and eventually had a spin-off. It's still around 30 years later, that printed barcodes. Why? Because I'm on the spectrum and I like to collect things. I like things in orders. I like patterns. I especially like prime numbers. So when it came to, so I had a huge contract with Hewlett Packard's LaserJet division for 9.5 years. It paid me more money than I could spend responsibly. I don't own a watch. I don't want a fancy car, but I had 3 kids and they had a good life. And the older 2 developed seizure disorders with the onset of adolescence. And Michael, my oldest, outgrew his seizures. He hasn't had one in yet 20 years, I guess. He's 34. He hasn't had one since high school. Coleman, on the other hand, my middle son, had them increasingly frequent, with increasing frequency and severity. He invited me to lunch when we weren't really getting along, which was wonderful. And he threw his medical card on the table and said, "Dad, I want help transitioning from pharma, because I hate the side effects, to cannabis." Well, I don't know much about it, but in 2.5 weeks, our dear friend Martin A. Lee, Marty, will be staying with us during Hemp Fest. Marty stayed for 6 days. He brought mason jars of those early CBD positive cultivars. Blew my mind, because I had grown up, puff, puff, I'm stoned, puff, 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 I'm really high now. Puff, puff, I feel good. Puff, 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 I feel great. So I had to readjust what expectation I had from consuming cannabis sativa L. All of the stuff that I grew up with was irrelevant when it came to CBD. At that point, it was hard to find plants. People weren't testing all that much. And I, as a collector, went out and found clones to grow for my son. He eventually learned to run Eden machines. And our last name is Whiting. Leblanc, CNE, is our last name in French. And And I began to collect genetics for my son, clones at first, but also seeds. And so 7 years ago, last week, Coleman died during a seizure. It sparked me even further to explore this stuff. I'm wearing a Hemp Fest t-shirt. And the real turning point for Coleman and I was the weekend of the Sanjay Gupta Charlotte Figge special. Hemp Fest is Friday, Saturday, Sunday. The show was on Sunday night. Fred Gardner and Marty Lee couldn't make it. And 5 days before, they said, yo, Doc, we've already paid for the booth. It's the one across from the Hemposium. You guys can do it. So that was our coming out. We met a whole bunch of people, D'Angelo's and DJ Short and Jorge Cervantes, because we were Project CBD during this beginning of the mainstream exposure of the world to the power of cannabis for medical purposes. And that was a big deal, you know. And so so I did have this contract with Hewlett Packard, and I bought photography and memorabilia around the civil rights movement and a focus on the Black Panther Party, to the degree that I was able to contribute about 245 items to the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture, because I am a revolutionary. So here we are now. Washington State University's hemp program is sponsoring a field trial of my design, looking at the influence of plant density and spacing on the herd to bast ratio. The closer plants are together, the taller they have to grow to get to the light, and the greater the bast that moves the nutrients and water to the top of the plant. If you're growing for the hempcrete market, you want herd, the woody part on the inside, so you plant things a little further apart to get that inner core, which you're going to, you know, sell to make hemp wood or hempcrete or whatnot. But there's some generalizations about 5 pounds of dry fiber by weight for every acre. Yeah, how close are the plants? What cultivar? Where do you live? Was that dry farming or pivot or whatnot? So I have this spreadsheet called FiberCal, because I am a nerd, always a spreadsheet. And the default was using these generally accepted rules of thumb. If you're a farmer and you've got a purchase agreement to grow for a certain customer, you can't play pin the tail on the donkey. You really need to know how much to plant, and how far apart to space it to get what you promised to have for sale at the end of the season. So this is a big deal. It hasn't been done before. And I'm trying to do it in a pretty granular basis. We've worked with the farm in Eatonville, Washington, the last 3 years. This year, that farm, Hunter Reich Farms, is on Washington State University's license. And they're helping us, literally, not only providing seeds, but working in the field with us. And the head of the department, David Gang, is going to be there tonight. And I'll be standing at attention, making sure that I'm doing everything okay. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now. Meanwhile, we're gearing up to do a Kickstarter campaign, because one of the big problems transitioning hemp grown for fiber into the mainstream is you have to grow a lot of it. The profit comes at scale. You're not growing 100 plants, you're growing 100 acres. And you can't be wrong. You need to have it dialed in order to be profitable. And a piece that I'm circulating now, Fiber is the future is fiber. Now that it's part of the National Building Code, think how much hemp would have to be grown, not just to build the average 2 or 3 story home, but a subdivision or a skyscraper, or you know, if your architect specs it out and there's nothing in the supply chain for the construction industry, your plans are sidetracked. There has to be, it has to enter the rotation of corn, wheat, soybeans, and if it's, you know, certain parts of the country, cotton or whatever, but it has to take its rightful place. And I really, I'm a suburban kid who's never been on a tractor. I really want small family farms that at least have a seat at the table on an equal par with the big guys to begin with. And one of the keys is, if you're a medium-sized farmer and you're trying to feed your family, like all of us are, aggregate your crop with your neighbors, just like dairy farmers do, because milk is milk is milk. And if everyone's got 50 cows and they gang it up, they have greater bargaining power in the marketplace. So there's a whole thing I would like to see happen as hemp for fiber gets rolled out to the construction industry, if nothing else. And that sets aside paper and textiles. But, you know, home building, you know, because one of the things when the lockdown happened and you couldn't get stuff because of the supply chain bottlenecks, for a minute there, I read a piece that said that hempcrete was on par with wood construction, which, because it's always been more expensive. But now that it's part of the National Building Code, and I'm surprised when I tell people what I do, I don't get jokes about hemp toilet paper anymore. People want to know about hempcrete. It's like, dude, have you ever seen it? Have you ever stuck your hands in it? Why are you so interested? I don't know where this little meme got started, but I think America is ready to embrace non-wood construction. Not that they're talking about how much it improves the soil or sequesters carbon. People know that hempcrete is a big deal as an option for everything from your doghouse in the backyard to a 5-story apartment building. That just makes my heart sing, you know? For a long time, granted, Sanjay Gupta, Charlotte Figi, CBD, but the mantra for literally decades has been food, fuel, fiber. This medicine thing came later, and it was the classic salesperson's foot in the door that opened the conversation and whatnot. But, you know, and deep respect to cannabis-based medicine, whether it's medicinal marijuana with THC or CBD, CBG, hemp. It's significant. I've seen it change number of people's lives. It's not a rumor. It's real. But yeah,
well, you and I both had common patients.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, so I want to see hemp for fiber or medicine grown responsibly without Roundup. I want to see the genetics come from companies other than the big six, you know, Syngenta and all and Dreyfus and Archer Daniels Midland and Monsanto. No, or Bayer now, it's Bayer. Step aside. Yeah, I don't want to see gene editing or gene modification. And I want to see real genetics, not these weird hybrids, because we all know that extinct is forever. So Legacy Project or USDA, we need to preserve what we know is available now, because there's a real good chance those seed selections are going to narrow down when big ag gets their place at the table. So it's a big thing, but you know, I think I have enough left in me that I can pull this off. Whoa. Sorry.
You're it's okay. You're known for a number of things, but you're known for your breeder rights.
Oh, the Cannabis Breeders Rights. Yes.
Yeah. So how did that emerge, and what was the outcome, and how do you see it integrate into, you know, useful service?
So coming from software, I had the same lawyer that I had with Azalea Software. Azalea Software is a kitchen table thing, and our first employee was our nanny, et cetera, et cetera. Classic midnight engineering thing. Doesn't happen anymore. That was 30 years ago. We met, DJ Short and I met that Charlotte Figi weekend when we did the Project CBD booth. In fact, DJ and Jorge Sabandas spent the weekend in our booth because they fell in love with my kids. And my kids, I'll never forget, Brian looked up and it's like, my dad made me watch all of your videos. And Jorge just went nuts. Anyway, I'm on a panel a year or two later called the Future of Strains or something. Mowgli from Phylos and DJ Short. Anyway, I didn't belong there. I didn't have a PhD, and I really didn't have that much. I didn't think I had that much to offer. But DJ, and the video is on our website, he made a comment about someone he said, we all stand on someone else's shoulder. We aren't God. We weren't doing the Garden of Eden. We had something to work with. I fear someone's going to take what I did, my breeding work, lock it up with the patent or some legal protection, and I won't have access to the derivatives of my original work. I raised my hand and said, so I write software and I release some of it, not with the copyright, but I use Creative Commons, which allows you within certain parameters and definitions to release it with strings attached, but the idea is sharing it. So DJ, I'll take a look if Creative Commons addresses your fears. When I delved into it, Creative Commons is really about digital content, and it would have been a stretch to make it apply to genetics. But out of my love and respect for DJ, I came up with something that would protect his right to interact with derivatives of his own breeding efforts. And there are 27 combinations of attribute, commercialization, et cetera, and the Cannabis Breeders Rights, CBR, was born out of that. I had to adjust it once, but it's a way for breeders, often individuals working alone, undercompensated, to have control over how their the fruits of their labor are handled by those who use it. Of course, there's no component for enforcement, and it gets goofy when you look at American plant protection in the EU and the rest of the world, because the two are not one-to-one compatible. It's voluntary. It establishes the breeder's intention and wishes and hopes as they release their work into the wild. Will it stand up in court? Not by itself, but I think if there is a structure that you adhere to, a schema, your lawyer can have an argument to make a case that no, Kevin released this with very clear established parameters about how it should be handled downstream. You knew that when you acquired the genetics, and you didn't conform to my wishes. Therefore, you know, even oral contracts have a place in the courtroom. So I was flattered when people in Humboldt reached out 3 years ago, I guess, with the idea of a week-long event, Cannabis Breeders Rights and Bioethics. And that was a fun week. You know, there was a different theme every day, and that Friday there was a panel, we talked about CBR, and I have no idea where it's being used. I occasionally sort of kick the meme out to the net and say, hey, look, don't forget about this. But I think we need to fend for ourselves and each other. It's been a plant under siege for decades. The feds don't give a shit. They can't make up their mind what to do with hemp even. But I think, you know, write your own future. You know, if breeders and seed distributors want control, you're not going to send lawyers into the neighbor's field looking for a drifted pollen like the big guys do. But, you know, this is ours. We don't want people taking it away. We don't want people passing restrictive laws or lobbying, you know, or passing envelopes of cash to grab hold of this, because there is money at stake. Not so much now, but 5 years from now, you know, this could escape us. This could be kept from us, and it's ours. I mean, we don't really own any of this. We don't own the earth. We don't own flora or fauna, but we need control over it because we live in a capitalist environment with greedy, short-sighted people pulling levers, and we don't want them pulling our lever.
Did you utilize your contract when you engaged with the USDA to share the germplasm with them? Was there a relationship that had to be created there?
No, it's a complicated thing in that it's not the USDA or the US government's genetics. They're the librarian, if you will, for the work of others. Zach and I haven't talked about it, but of all of the 41 cultivars I shared with them, there were no restrictions, but they weren't mine to restrict. The one exception was a hemp cultivar, a feral Chinese one, that I had genetically sequenced. It is definitely a type 2 plant. It's 1-to-1, in fact, has slightly more THC. It sequences as hemp in the yellow part of the galaxy that they had. And the results came back never before seen, no close relatives. And the whisper was, you know, if you breed with this, you could have a whole new cluster of hemp genetics that no one else has. So there were a couple of large companies who sort of had a bidding war about that. I've held on to it. The USDA has a placeholder, and I need to talk with them about. So there were two individuals representing two companies who laid out the royalty structure, and it was attractive. And so I'm torn between, and it's named Sizzle the Engine, which was Coleman's hip hop nom de guerre. And some people know that connection, like Ben Holmes. I'm on the fence. I really want to release this. I wouldn't mind making a little money on it. And so Zach actually asked about Sizzle when we spoke on a Zoom last week. I need to figure out, staring at a wall, I need to smoke a joint, stare at a blank wall, meditate on this, and figure out what the right and righteous thing to do with it is. It isn't about getting rich, but it's about having a genetic memorial to Coleman, shall we say. For example, I've gone and had his name on on a NASA spacecraft. You can have your name go up with it. So he's on 3 of those, and I get updates about that. I really miss him,
Oh, he was a lovely boy. Your son was.
He was the best, man.
I know, he was a sweetheart. I got to spend some time with him, with Aaron.
Yes.
Yeah, no, and he was just, there's a lot of people that are good, and then there's a lot of people that are smart. It's rare you get good and smart in the same package.
And he had a heart. I remember he was a
good heart.
And he noticed that gay clients were coming in and getting lubes, and he said, "Hey, look, this is going to destroy condoms. Let me make a product that is safe for safe sex." And he did, and it didn't separate, and people were doing, other products that did, and I was really proud of him because he could have just rung up the cash register and said, "Hey, this is going to screw you in the end. I'm not going to tell you. That's not my problem." But he never wanted. So when I was teaching and lecturing around town, he would come, but I wasn't allowed to talk about him and point him out, but he would stay and talk to people one-on-one and share his experiences. He was a quiet guy, he was, and he ran Eating Machines, but he also learned at 14 how to run a 16-track recording studio.
Mm-hmm.
Recording engineer, bright kid, loved kids and small animals. What can I say?
That's not bad. He was a good boy.
Yeah.
From your perspective, let's take a look at like a 2 tracks, a good track and a bad track. And the good track is, how do you see, cannabis hemp genetics playing roles as legalization in the industry evolves in a positive route? Like, what would be something that would be good? Yeah. And then what is as the alternative that would be negative?
So I live in a state that has taken the wrong approach to hemp. So there is no botanical basis, but it is legally cannabis sativa L with less than 0.3% THC. The politicians and one of the lobby groups here in Washington State, they passed a law that says that any detectable amount qualifies as cannabis and has to be sold in the recreational dispensaries. It can't be sold open market, which means that Washington has a more restrictive hemp definition than the federal government. And some of us think that 0.3 is too low and arbitrary, and yet I've been told that there are people with lawyers lined up to challenge the law. There is a carve-out for us to grow hemp with less than 0.3 THC this year, 2023. That kind of thinking it stymies and stifles this wonderful industry that has the potential to provide all these positive things. So I'd like the feds to listen to the industry and come up with reasonable laws that allow startups to mature. I come from software. I have way less restrictions in software than I do with hemp, which is just, it's a plant. It has huge potential. So I'd like to see the FDA talk about food and the consumption. I'd like the FDA to talk about animals and bedding. Montana grows it, Montana wants to do 1% and use it for bedding and feed. They don't really give a good gosh darn. And that causes dissonance and confusion in the industry, and that's unfortunate. I'd like to see a unified approach from the US government about the whole plant spectrum. Cannabis with THC, hemp with or without. Just come up with a workable system. It's like saying, it's arbitrary, and it's holding us all back. That's, an indirect answer to your question, I'm afraid.
No, so I remember I had a conversation years ago with someone that was a hemp producer in Eastern Europe, and we were having a conversation about I was very and I still am. I'm undereducated in hemp because it's not where I spend my time. So I try to people that do occupy the space so I can better understand, what the struggles are and the advantages. And it was that the Eastern Europeans had a less restrictive THC level, because what they had found was that due to gene linkage and trait movement, that when you were looking for better herd, better fiber content, it almost came synonymously with a slightly higher THC level.
Yes.
So what it did is it created a situation where the American producers had to use a product that was inferior in production compared to the European product. So we were already operating at a loss in competitive scale. And it was fascinating because we have such a draconian view on cannabinoids that it becomes confusing. And so the idea is like with the breeder rights and with what Lily's laid out with the auction, a lot of that will set a tone, hopefully, for future development, where we can say, as the government becomes more aware and educated on the competitiveness industry, and how when you artificially put blocks in place, you completely dismantle a growing industry. We'd then be able to have valuation, because, like you said, you have things that have extremely high production values. They're unique, and to me, the uniqueness is a critical component. Not just because it's unique, but what does unique imply? That it doesn't share common genes with other plants, which means that it shouldn't, or it may have the potential to not be impacted pathogenically. So you're not. So what we've done now, and you can see in cannabis, is that we've bottlenecked these populations to where there's only so many parental lines that create everything we work with.
Yep.
And every time we have an issue, it spreads through the industry like a plague. And I don't think people are as aware of the fact that the reason why it's spreading through so quickly is because everything's related.
Yes. I spoke with a friend of mine in Oregon just yesterday who had the top latent virus or whatever, he had to wipe out his whole thing. He's a breeder whose stuff is in the commercial market in a couple of states. And, he's dedicated, because I'm going back to my seeds, hoping that they're not infected, and I'm back to square one. He was smart enough to have inventory stockpiled for the medical market in Oregon to be able to start over again without going broke. But there's so many individuals like you and others who have spent years developing really valuable genetics. I don't want to, the food that we eat is controlled by 6 seed companies, and it's a small portion, a subset of all the lettuces and all the corns and all the everything else. And I don't want to see. So you mentioned Eastern Europe. Yes, there is hemp for victory survivors on back roads in the U.S. And those are what I call domestic feral populations, because birds have spread those seeds within small areas, a given terroir, and they've been around longer than I've been around. I mean, I wasn't born until 53. So some of this stuff is 10 years older than me, that was planted with the government's backing to replace the rope that the Japanese controlled the growing fields for. So I think,
Manila.
yeah, exactly. So the idea of there being a concerted effort either by the USDA or by the growers in Humboldt and surrounding areas to catalog and preserve and share their genetics is paramount, because we know that big ag doesn't give a gosh darn. All they care about is money, money, and more money. And the people who did this breeding work and distributed and maintained this gene pool need to get their due reward. And small farmers, small farmers don't own anything more than bank debt. And it's just now that the right to repair John Deere is coming to the legal forefront. So farmers have it hard enough. And we don't, yes, fiber needs to be grown at scale. I mean, like corn and soybeans, not a couple acres, but literally thousands of acres of hemp. But I don't want to see it to be all corporate. I don't want to see them throw out 3/4 of the genetics because they've tweaked and patented or whatever for things that they're going to build shareholder value on. That's not the way it should work.
No, I agree. And the issue with like conventional breeding and then registration is it's almost predominantly off of germplasm weight.
Yeah.
So you're really measuring, did my yield increase go up? And with cannabis, it's similar in sense that we say, hey, it has a specific cannabinoid level or a specific production level. And to me, what you've done is you've weeded out the usefulness for a large portion of the population who rely on obscure cannabinoids, unique metabolite profiles, which allows them to derive their benefit. And the ability to be able to create value enough in those things and awareness, which was what I was always so interested in your breeder rights piece, because I saw the parallels between code and the gene code, and how that in the computer world, you're having to allow these evolutions to come forward so that you can continually perpetually drive an industry forward.
Right.
And it's this open source idea, but with restrictions or with comments
that
allow you to be able to hold some intent. And it struck with me because it's the same thing with cannabis, where for so many, the larger the group, the more they want to monopolize the component. The smaller the individual, what they want to do is share the component, but be able to derive benefit from it in some fair and equitable manner.
And they should expect to be rewarded. I mean,
yes, no, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be like it's a gift.
And no one's doing you a favor.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think, in addition to sequestering carbon and a bunch of other things, I think cannabis and hemp has a secondary benefit, goal, aspiration to shift the balance of power away from pharma, because it's a plant-based medicine with fewer side effects and perhaps better results, to turn the tide of consolidation of farmland and big ag back to family farms in the kind of sense that, they own debt. And the 800-pound gorilla nobody wants to talk about, American farmers commit suicide at an amazing rate. Why? Because they see how futile their life's work is, especially if they're a second or third generation farmer.
The shame that you were the generation that couldn't maintain. And so much of it is this conversation that hard work alone gets you to the top.
Yeah,
and then if you fail, it's because you didn't try hard. It's your fault. Yes, you're a failure. And that's what I noticed. And it's odd because these two suicide groups that strike me most are farmers and veterans.
Yes.
And it's the same circumstance. They both come back. They both get into issues that are above their control, and they're made to feel as if they're inferior because they can't handle the stress, or they can't deal with the guilt of what occurred. And for veterans, it's what they were involved in. With farmers, it's this generational holding. until you meet people that have held land for hundreds of years, you don't really understand the pressure of maintaining that integrity chain. And I see it with conventional farmers, and now we're seeing it in cannabis.
Yeah, and you can't say that, well, I'm gonna, you're forced at a bank auction to sell your acres, but there's acres down the road. Yeah, but my family's spirit is right here, and you're telling me that that land 2 counties away is equivalent? It's not to my family. And that's an intangible, and I deeply respect that. And it goes with with the tribes as well, I mean,
Yeah, it's an unfair situation when you lay out a contract, Jerry, in software and in cannabis.
uh-huh.
What are the types of comments or restrictions that you put on that you think are fair?
Oh, so I intellectual property, IP, it's the core of both my involvement in software and my involvement with cannabis and hemp. So when I went to Scott Warner, the lawyer who helped me establish Azalea Software, I went to his office and took the magic marker up to the whiteboard and laid out what I had in mind. Now there was another lawyer who I'd never met before in the room, and at certain points Scott and I would chuckle, and his associate said, "What's so funny?" "Well, Jerry, this is what you did with software." My response was, I changed ones and zeros to DNA. And so I have a body of intellectual property, either stuff that prints barcodes or stuff that grows wonderful plants. And I'm going to derive benefit and income from that by putting into the marketplace. And I need to define what it is. I need to define because you don't buy software, you rent the rights or you lease it. A company can pull that back and make you uninstall it. That's not what I want to do because you're going to want a refund. But it's the same thing, is that I need to define what it is our contract is covering, and I convey rights to you with what you can do that cover what you can do with that software or these genetics. And in return, I get remuneration or some other consideration. And both parties read it, both parties sign, and in contracts that I do, both in software and in hemp, I want the court case tried not only in Washington State, but in King County. Because with high tech, we're all here. And hopefully a jury of my peers, or even the average person on the street, knows a little bit about Google and Microsoft and everyone else in town. And so I want to be on my home court if I need to challenge you in a legal environment. And that's, so I've got a non-disclosure agreement that I have people sign, which and Scott hates it because mine is so straightforward. It basically says, I'll keep your secrets if you'll keep mine. We have a secure channel where we don't have outsiders, Eve or Mallory, to use cryptographic terms, but we have an understanding, a pinky swear back, that we're not going to talk trash behind your back or talk to competitors or use it for your own purposes. And then there's a letter of intent, an LOI. We've agreed to share secrets. And the letter of intent says, okay, we have a handshake to move together in this direction. This is not, but we've written down our expectations before we get to the heart of the matter. It says that we're both on the same page, and the scope of the conversation and the agreement covers these sort of things in specific and general terms. And the third step is a contract, which is, straightforward. And the contracts that I like lay out a generalization about the project at hand, and you use an appendix to that contract to add new things. So you're talking about say we have a contract that talks about hemp, and then we come up with another use case that's related to that. You don't have to go back to square one. We already have a non-disclosure, an NDA, that says we're not going to spill the beans and share secrets. We already have a letter of intent, and we're going to focus and broaden that letter of intent in a tangential direction. We don't need a new contract. We just need to do an addendum to the existing contract. I've had parties scream and yell about that. And it's like, you don't get it. until you sign a non-disclosure agreement, I ain't saying shit to you because it'll come back to haunt me later. And if you're not willing to sign your name to a pinky swear to keep your mouth shut, this conversation is over. There's no negotiation. So in the real world, in the business world, non-disclosures, letters of intent resulting in contracts is the progression of steps. I have had people in cannabis and hemp balk at that. And I'm like, I'm not making this up. Go Google it. This is the way the world is. Shit, I'm the son and nephew of attorneys. Not that I went to law school, but I do know IP law, and I encourage anyone in cannabis or hemp who's going to, especially if you're doing business with a company bigger than yours, because that means they've got better and more expensive lawyers than you do. So getting yourself on a firm footing and working in that 3-step thing of non-disclosure, letter of intent, contract, or 4 steps when you add addendums to that CYA, cover your ass. And if and Cannabis Breeders Rights can come into that because you can reference it in the contract that says, oh, what we're talking about, sharing back and forth, there's a standard definition of what you can do when you get something from me. And the more CBR is used and accepted, the more inertia and strength it has. But really, I encourage anyone in cannabis or hemp to have a good lawyer who understands intellectual property, because really it's, whether it's zeros and ones for software or DNA for plants, it's the same business relationship, and you need to anticipate X% of the people in the field are going to be bad actors. They're going to try and pull one over on you. And again, the bigger companies with the money that I've turned away. I remember being on a phone call with a software company. We had to plug into their stuff that was very successful, and they wanted us to do something else. And we had a speakerphone on the table, and there were 3 of us at the time, and they were bitching because I turned down an offer that in absolute dollar value seemed really good, but I knew that they were undervaluing what we were bringing to the table, and they wanted to bully us. And I stood my ground. I met that product manager who was on our side at an industry event months later. He said, man, I'm really proud of you. They were trying to screw you over and you didn't back down. And I really respect you for that. And, sometimes it happens in cannabis and car parts for the automakers or any industry, that the established players with clout are going to try and push around the small people in an effort to make more money and have control, soup to nuts, over the whole thing. No, stand up. If they've got something you want, my football, my rules kind of thing was what I was taught. So having things like the Cannabis Breeders Rights or knowing that you can do this non-disclosure letter of intent contract, you can back out at any time and renegotiate or just walk away. This is something that it's painful because you're looking at what could be, but just like that software company competitor, the PageMaker in Denver, these are the 2 owners. They were trying to bully me. And we were doing hand signals and notes during this conference call, and my staff is freaking out going, that's a lot of money. No, it's not. It is to us. It's an insult coming from them. They have way more, and they know the value of it from their side of the table. They're trying to screw me over. I'm sorry. I'd rather, die standing up than die on my knees. I'm not bowing down for anyone. I've done direct action politically at protests. I don't give a shit. I'm a black man from Cleveland. Go fuck yourself.
That's about as real as it gets.
Homeboy, I know your stories in the past. We talked about the OG life. And it's, you wish that business was personal and genteel and wonderful, but that ain't the way the world is. And especially the bigger the industry, the more is at stake. Stand up for yourself. Or yeah,
a lot of it, Jerry, is that the growers don't. I don't think it's that they definitely don't lack balls.
No,
but they lack precedent, and so they don't have a map to follow that lets them understand what's fair and not fair. And they are in such a situation. All of us in the industry are always liquidity low.
Yeah,
you're never fluid with cash. And because of it, any money that's held in front of you looks better than it should, and you don't understand the value of reoccurring benefit. You don't realize that you should be mining this benefit for the duration of the life of this product, not just on an initial sale. And I think that's where all your tech background was so valuable, and that it allowed you to understand how an industry that you were part of developing, because you were in that early beginning of our modern tech world. How did they create this behemoth around us in a way that was so rapid? And it had to have been with these collaborative type arrangements. You couldn't silo the info.
No.
There had to be a way to share. And I think that that's where, with cannabis, so many want to see projects occur, but they don't know how to protect, and they don't know the real value because we haven't had a valuation. And I think that that was one of the things that really attracted me about an auction model, was it allows you to put things up for competitive bid and start to really see what is this worth to someone, because we don't sell genetics to large companies. We sell cannabis products to consumers. And so the range of price that a consumer will pay is radically different than what some germplasm is worth, when it can absolutely change. We talked about, and it's funny because most of the things that have made the most money in the industry were bred accidentally. It wasn't so much intent.
Right.
But you look at some of these foundation lines, and what are they really worth, when for the last 25 years, everything grown that was successful had that germplasm as part of it.
Right.
What did these people really give up in value? And how is that lesson learned so that we're better able? And so if an individual wanted to learn more about protecting themselves, is there a path that you would recommend that a grower could take? Is there literature? Is there online education? Is there people they should speak with, so they just get a good rounded idea of what is the world of intellectual property? How does it become valued? What is the valuation process?
Yeah.
What's the enforcement? Because that's what seems to be in law. So I know, like with the auction, you have canopy right, which is also a contractual form of breeder rights.
Mm-hmm.
And it's another program designed to allow people to plug into something that's pretty stable to simplify the process. But if an individual just wanted to become more educated, what's the path? What's the first thing one would look at to become more knowledgeable?
So this conversation, in some ways, is parallel to DJ Short musing out loud about losing access to his own work that resulted in the CBR. You've inspired me to write at least a brief overview directed at breeders and farmers about, okay, so when I explained to Scott and wrote in the whiteboard what I had in mind for Leblanc CNE, his partner did get the jokes when we were laughing back and forth, but it really was bringing a software model to genetics. Now, you mentioned an auction. The nice thing about that is you realize that Alphabet, aka Google, the ads, when I buy an ad through Google, I'm bidding on the placement, and the collective market sets the valuation. So in a sense, and I'd have to stare at a blank wall, but there's an argument to be made that the auction sets the natural community valuation for the thing that's the gavel's coming down on. If I want to be number one for CBD tincture on Google, I have to pay heavily to get that slot, because it isn't a fixed price like the ad rates for a print magazine. No, it's a dynamic thing, and I'm bidding for the position and the keywords against everyone else who wants to sell CBD tincture. It's expensive to be at the number one slot. Why? Because it's worth more. How that relates to genetics? Well, the auction. If there are three of us in the room holding up our number to say, oh yeah, I really want item 17. Well, is it worth a lot? When the gavel comes down, we'll know what the consensus valuation is. And that's it. Look how rich Google got. selling ads that way. No one cares about Yahoo ads or anything else. Google commands, and I made a bunch of money on a personal website doing Google ads. It got to the point I would go into the bank. I was getting checks from Yahoo and Google. It was my neighborhood branch. And one time the cashier looked up and said, Jerry, why is Google writing you checks? I said, oh, well, I have this website and I've learned to play the AdWord game. And, I was making enough money that when I bought a condo, I qualified for a jumbo mortgage, whatever they call it. I was getting like $1,200, $1,500 a month for a while. And why? Because I had the pretty girl at the ball that everyone was trying to get a date with. I had a website that had attraction for people who were trying to sell certain things. The mosquito ringtone and a bunch of other geeky stuff. And it worked. And it also was a two-way street. When I realized, and I went to, Google actually invited me to a couple of one-on-ones where they taught me how to play the game. When I realized what part of my website attracted the most ad revenue for me, when you find out which of your 5 genetics makes the most money, you raise the price. It's a dynamic thing and everybody wins. And so an auction model, be it for ad space on a website or genetics from an exclusive, elite, and world famous region in the cannabis world, it establishes the real valuation. You can have expectations and you might find that none of the bids come to what you had in mind, or the inverse. Man, I thought that was worth 100. That's worth 10,000. Whoa. Hey, we're going to Disneyland, kids. And because it's agnostic in a sense. It's a consensus price for something that's available to a group of people who know what it's worth. They know what it's worth to them. And as a result, that community has put a price tag on the item that's being bid on. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense because I understand the model with the digital advertising because it's always variable. It's they're letting you know that if you want to reach an audience today of this size,
yes,
this is how much you have to pay. And that number varies continuously. So you're
dynamic.
You're always in flux until you lock it in, and then you're locked in for a set amount of time.
And everyone else who didn't win knows what it's worth too. And the people who came later, either next month's auction or next generation, there's a peg in the ground that says, oh, no. This is where the discussion about money starts, because the community in a level playing field all had a chance to raise their hand and raise the price, but it stopped at, $250 or whatever. But that is what it's worth. That's not my opinion. That's what the community says. So yeah, I'm tempted to write up, it'll be sketchy notes to spark a conversation and to inspire people to think about the value of their labor in a market that's been underground and closed. And an auction is actually perfect. I mean, look at Google, look at Alphabet. They parlayed that into an empire.
Yes, without question. And I just think that's the value of this discussion with you today so much, is that it's, for me at least, it's allowing me to understand better how you utilized your experience in another industry that relies so heavily on shared assets,
yes,
and compensation, and how we can educate individuals to understand the similar process can occur in cannabis. And this way, what it does, it allows individuals that are innocent to not get preyed upon by nefarious groups where they know you're desperate. They offer you crumbs instead of a cake, and then you get no cake later either. So
and they're never going to give you the recipe to make your own cake. So you sort of in a sense have one shot at it. But the other thing that's hard for people to understand is what I did with Cork is to walk away from a bad deal, because in your heart of hearts what the value is, and you have to assume others are going to try and lowball you. But there's an ouch number. Either it's too high or it's too low. Other thing I want to add is, in many of these contracts, So you've got a company and I'm a breeder, I bring you seeds. Part of the contract says, if I do another deal like this, the price can't vary but so much from what I've already established for you. I don't want the second person to come in and lowball me. So for example, I had a contract with Hewlett Packard's LaserJet division. They command the printer market. I talked with Epson and other printer manufacturers. I said, I'm sorry, I already got a 20% royalty out of Hewlett Packard. If I give you a 10%, I have to go back and give HP a 10%. But since I made a deal with the 800-pound gorilla that controls the market, I have no contractual or financial reason to go less than that. Many people will not think to put that language in, but the other side, the big folks know about that. So yeah, you set a precedent with you have the option to set a precedent with the first licensing deal you do, that if someone else comes along, oh no, I don't have to accept your 10% offer, because if I do, I have to offer the first person to do a contract 10% too, but I'm already getting 12.5%, and I could, but I'm not motivated to shoot myself in the foot, and that's one of those. Yeah, so I will write some of this stuff up. It won't be complete, but it'll get people thinking heaven forbid, thinking the way that I do. But you're right. I learned a lot from software, and software's changed. So my youngest son is a dev, and he's had a string of jobs, God bless him. And for a while, his wife was a placement, person for the industry. And they sat me down and said, what you got, you and your homeboys did 30 years ago, that's not how it works now. Let me tell you. And it was this whole thing about, you don't have when I was coming up, when I signed a contract with you, my vesting to get my shares was on a 4-year cycle. Now you can get it when you come in as a signing bonus, and people are not loyal for 4 years because they're compensated short term. Mm-hmm. And that's why I can't afford to eat dinner out in a town dominated by tech bros and tech hoes driving Teslas and overbidding on the real estate. It sort of prices you out. And I don't want to see hemp and cannabis going down that same path where some 23-year-old with a CS degree is making $165,000 out of the gate and can outbid the people who were second-generation Seattleites buying a house. Teslas in this town are like flies on shit. They're everywhere. And the unsheltered, the homeless population is a direct result of the shift in household income for people who aren't married, don't have kids, don't care about the schools, and want to live next to each other in these residential tech ghettos. And it's really changed the city, and not for the better, But these are the sort of things that you're right. People have been working solo and not compensated. And when someone comes along and offers to buy or license their genetics, they're going to grab. They're going to say, "Oh God, please, yes. Will this check clear?" But you have to think long term. You have to think, if someone else comes along, am I contractually obligated to offer them the same deal? I can't get 15% because I'm locked at 12.5. Or is there a non-compete that I can't do? And I've had these contracts too, where I license my stuff to Wonderland Nursery, but I can't license it to any other nursery for the next 12 months. So I'm locked in, and I think, oh, great, I've got 12 months that I can count on this coming every quarter. I'm going to get money. Yeah, but when someone else comes along and wants to do a similar thing, you got to wait 11 months, 2 weeks. I'm tied up to this one. I didn't think anybody else was interested, so I didn't have any issue with signing that because I was going to get paid. But I painted myself in a corner, and I can't expand. I have to wait, and so yeah, I guess people should. I haven't looked at it recently, but there's a group called NOLO Press, NOLO, that has like kits to do your own will or set up your own business or whatnot. But to start reading up on contract law, you don't have to go to law school, but to at least understand the progression of non-disclosure, letter of intent, contract, addendums to that contract, or you know, the big guys are going to want to do a court case in their backyard. Hell no. I don't want more money. I want to try it in King County. Why? Because the average person on the street knows how the software industry works, and they're going to be receptive to me, not just because I'm a local, because they realize, hey, my brother-in-law works for Microsoft. This seems to be unfair. I'm going to side with the grower, because, you know, we're the software dev, because you got screwed. You know, I hear this conversation at the family barbecues, and you know. So yeah, I think that that people need to take responsibility for their work and how they share that work and get compensated. And it's daunting. And when you're broke and you put years into this, and these are your children, you know, these genetics, these are mine. I appreciate and respect that emotional component, but y'all need to get paid, and you need to think about your kids so that. So for instance, when people were talking about licensing Sizzle the engine, one company laid out a really straightforward thing. They said, we're going to pay you X amount for the first generation of stuff, but when we breed something else, we're going to give you half of that amount and then a quarter. And there'll be this long tail effect where if we make a whole class of cultivars based on Sizzle the engine, you get residuals. You're going to get, you know, for the F1s, you're going to get so much. And then when we breed on top of that, you're going to get half of that. And that long tail effect, those, they're called the 2% club at Azalea. We had certain things like Code 39 and UPC that were like the bulk of the sales, you know, that 80-20 rule. But there were 4 or 5 products that we sold one a month, the 2%ers. You could ignore them, but we realized, and we added all of those minor barcode symbologies up, they were a significant, it wasn't, you know, we weren't going out and spending a long weekend on Airbnb at a company retreat, but it's like, look how much these minor players contribute. We'd missed that money. That was our conclusion. The 2%ers, we're not selling a lot of those, but all of them together as that long tail end of our catalog, at the end of the day, end of the quarter, end of the year, we're not going to walk away from that. We should probably write more of those because it adds up. And at the end, we had a staff of like 7 at one point, but then it ended up being just Miranda and I. Everything moved to the cloud. We weren't burning CDs, and there wasn't that much R&D and new development going on. And we used to joke and say, Azalea software, all we have to do is feed 2 families. And we both had sons. Miranda had a son who was Coleman's age. As long as we can put a roof over our head, food on the table, and have money at the end of the day, we're doing okay. We felt obligated to tithe ourselves, to give back, because it was the right thing to do, and people had helped us, and we wanted to help the world. But yeah, you know, people need to think about contract law, not that you're going to be applying to law school, but at least to recognize an unfair deal when it's presented to you, no matter how big the check. And it's hard to walk away, but I got to tell you, like my father used to say, if you don't respect who you see in the mirror in the morning, use the razor to slit your throat.
That's a real one.
I know. Well, you know, now, you know, Donnie worked there. His brother Tom was my best friend growing up, and Tom nicknamed my dad Elmer the Harsh. But it was true, you know, you have to respect yourself. You don't want to sell yourself short, and you don't want to like kick yourself in the pants every time you cash that royalty check. You want to feel proud of your work. You know, take pride in what you've done. And the other side will recognize that. And if they're assholes, they're going to walk away and try and screw you a second time. If they're really good people, they're going to meet you halfway. Because I think even if it's Hewlett Packard or IBM or whoever, it ends up being 2 people shaking hands. And if you build a relationship with that person, and it's based hopefully on honesty, transparency, and mutual respect, then you can find something where both parties win. And if you're going to lose, walk away. I don't care how big the check is, because in the end, you need to respect yourself. You know, I mean, that feels better than a big bank account. I know it sounds weird, but you know, yeah, that's, your mileage may vary, but
True. We had a conversation. We had a conversation with an individual named Osama Badad, a Moroccan geneticist,
Mhm.
and his view on it was that Morocco has produced historically the largest quantity of hash sold in Europe, and that at the end of the day, the only way that the European market can provide to the customer that product is to go through the Moroccan farmer.
Yep.
And their goal is to really create an equitable relationship for the first time that says, no, you don't just take our products. You're forced to actually compensate us in a fair manner. And he believes that with the education they're providing, the farmers are able to understand the don't take the money and walk away. Because
Yes.
at the end of the day, and we know this from our world of selling cannabis, is that at the end of the day, if you don't like the price, then go home with nothing. And let's see how it works out for you. And so what happened is people got desperate and capitulated, and they didn't really understand that there has to be a product to be sold. And if you prevent there from being accessed, there is no product to be sold. And you now effectively drive the middlemen out of business.
Yeah.
Because you have that leverage, but you have to have almost, we call it illegal, but collusion and price fixing are the tools that the small operate on, and it allows them to at least standardize a range. We used to have standard price ranges in Humboldt where if you came in and wanted to buy units for less than this price, we would say no.
Right.
And it allowed there to be a price stability that was abnormal for a long time. And then once you started to get new individuals in the industry, they said, well, that's a lot of money to me. I'm going to capitulate. And it created the slippery slope that we all slid down into, where people become price war conscious, where you're only trying to, sell it for less than your neighbor. And eventually you're having to pay the person to take it because there's no value. And I think that, that's such an important part of this. And I just want to say thank you so much for, bringing that insight in, because I don't think that people understand like the true value. When you buy a plant at a store, you're paying, X amount for a clone. But I know how much nurseries pay for plants that are valuable.
Right.
And when you realize that a clone goes for 15, but the parent plant went for 50G, there's a radical difference there. And it's not that every plant's worth 50, but some of them are worth 500G.
Yeah.
And how we create and set that up. And so the Nolo press was the
Yes. It's a I don't want to say DIY law, but I haven't looked for a while, but they had a thing about law for dog owners. Your dog bites someone when you're walking in the park or whatnot. But it at least tutors people on the generalizations of specific types of law, be it family law and divorce, be it insurance companies and whatnot, but to familiarize yourself with the overview, top view, so that you walk into a discussion, negotiation, contract with your eyes open, knowing your options. And in a perfect world, there's a back and forth where both parties think that they won. And that's because, again, it's business between two people. I don't care how big the company behind them. And as long as you can reach a mutually satisfactory and arrangement, then it'll go on. And many contracts will auto renew. This is good for a year, but we're going to come back and revisit it, much like a lease. You don't want someone to say, and it was a sad time when HP decided to pull the plug on us because it meant we actually had to work for the money. But yeah, I think people need to have a working familiarity with the lay of the land in terms of contracts, and to understand the dynamic that goes between both parties trying to reach a consensus agreement. And there's going to be, push and shove sometimes. And you need to know the walkaway number. And for me, it's the ouch number. If I'm licensing to you, I'm going to throw a price out and see when you go, ooh, that's too much. Okay, and me back down. I know the upper limit now. We've established parameters. We're going to find that place in the middle, because you don't want to turn people off, but you also don't want to get screwed. And if there's anyone that will screw the cannabis genetics market, it's the big seed companies. And you may say, we're not doing business with the big six. You know, we're going to find alternative distribution methods or do it ourselves, which is even more powerful. But you're right. If there are 10 growers in the county and one of them is going to break rank and drive to the bottom and just settle for, oh, I'll take 5%. I don't give a shit. I'm going to get the check every quarter. I'm down. You can't bully that person, but you understand that the first people that go out are going to set the parameter that everyone else has to walk into later. And the more cohesion there is in the community about, no, the auction said that this stuff starts, this is the bottom price. We're not going under that. We'll walk away from it, because if they're really interested, they're going to come back to the table and give us something that works for both sides. And that's painful, man, because unfortunately, children like to eat 3 or 4 times a day, and bank doesn't take, kindly to you not paying your loan. That's just
true. No, it's the realities of it, but it's these conversations that have to occur, so we better understand how to operate. We learned how to operate with a handshake, which I think I still like most because it involves the human trust.
Yes.
But now it's you're having to be very cautious because the people that are coming to speak to you are bringing a team of attorneys with them to create the best possible situation for themselves. And I don't fault them for that either. That's due diligence. Yeah, that's due diligence on your part. It's just trying to create an educational process for individuals who want to be involved either currently, where they have material they want to enter into a system for a negotiation, potential licensing sale. And then for me, I always dream of new talent coming into an industry so that you're always bringing freshness and new development. And the only way you can attract people is if they believe they're going to get compensated fairly for their efforts.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And so the ability to create these programs, these models, allows you to be able to say, hey, if I, take opportunity cost and I spend the next 3 years going into a genetic direction versus something else that I'm also comparably skilled at and have an ability to succeed with potentially, then how do we get those people to come in? And to me, it's these protections that allow that. And for me, I don't fear new people coming in the industry because I certainly didn't create the industry that I'm in. Right. So to me, I'm relatively new as well, because in the big blip of time, I'm just this little link today. But hopefully, we're a good
self-deprecating, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I think that the cannabis hemp genetics crowd needs to self-educate about the big picture in the long term so that they're comfortable with specific instances. Because, we got to a point where with Hewlett Packard where we got paid quarterly. And the upside was we worked out of the Corvallis, Oregon facility, and we got to a point with the royalty structure that we exceeded the signing authority of that facility. And then they came up with this workaround where they would cut a PO at the beginning of the year, a little bigger than what they expected the royalties to pay. They would sneak the sales figures to us and we would invoice knowing what they sold against that standing PO. Now that was like a wonderful situation for 9.5 years, we'd look at that annual PO and go, oh, you think you're going to sell this much this year, and we're going to see 4 checks every quarter, that will make that up. I'm glad you're confident because you have accountants that are doing the projections. Cool. But until you, and I also, I don't want to say we preyed upon the person in Corvallis we negotiated with, but we should have gotten between 8 and 12% royalties. I threw out 25 looking for the ouch number. Roger drained back down to 20. We were sitting at that table around the speakerphone, just, we knew that we had him at that point. He came into that negotiation ignorant of what the industry's consensus was for royalty payments. He gave us too much money. But once we signed the contract, and you can bet we didn't say a word, we were locked into 20% of what they sold coming back to us. That was unheard of. I got high fives from my homeboys, I tell you that, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was like, people were like, "You did what?" And I said, "I know. Bunch of hippies in the loft, man. We pulled the wool over there." Or we didn't, it was a very transparent discussion, but the other party, even though it was HP, he didn't have the context to negotiate responsibly in an educated manner on his end. And he committed his boss's boss's boss to paying us double. Okay. You know, it works both ways.
Yes, it can go both directions. Whoever's most educated on the topic.
Yes.
Yes.
Whoever knows
And
the rules.
that's where the cannabis individuals, so many have been taken advantage of, because even though they're incredibly intelligent in the way they are, they're very underexperienced in doing contract law.
It's innocence and naivety, which is terrible. And I will write something up about this, and it'll be, and I'm more interested in the feedback I get, pro or con, or I'm confused. I lay this thing out that is outside of the scope of most people's experience. But again, I haven't been contradicted when I say, now that hemp creek is in the National Building Code, it's going to take its place in the grain belt and MAGA country, middle of the, you know, where corn, wheat, soybeans, all this stuff is grown. It's going to be the other industry at the farm level, and it will take its place with purchase agreements in writing, not handshakes, or I grew it, who's going to buy it? No one knows who you are. It will end up on the in the Wall Street Journal, along with pork bellies and all the other futures, and we're going to have to get there. Now, unfortunately, Brian and I looked at what it would. So, Leblanc CNE, Cannabis Négociant Éleveur. The business model is similar to what goes on in Bordeaux, to some degree Burgundy, that we're grower brokers. The problem is neither Brian nor I, my son and I, have the right kind of bachelor's degrees that lets us qualify to become commodities trainers. And we don't want to go to school to get that bachelor's degree, but we'd like someone that we're friend of the family to do that, so that they can be the person on the trading floor moving hemp products around along with other big ag products. And we revisited that conversation a couple of weeks ago. It's like, yeah, it's going to happen. It's going to happen before we die. But really, I don't want to do that. I have other things that I'm passionate about, and I really don't want to go get a certain financial bachelor's to then sit for the exam to become a commodities trader.
I was just going to ask, what is that special bachelor's that's required? It's in finance?
It is, and it's a certain thing. We looked at it, you know, kind of closely. This is the son who, God bless, channels his grandfather, the CPA attorney. Math whiz, didn't go to college. He says, my friends have student loans. I have a mortgage and a portfolio. But yeah, we looked at it and went, yeah, it's almost like hazing. I'm not sure that bachelor's degree makes you a better commodity trader. It's a club, and you want to get in, you got to be, you know the password and do the hazing and all that. And they said, we touched on it a few weeks ago. It's like, no, I still don't want to do that, but someone's going to have to. And I think that the more the cannabis hemp industry moves like a school of fish and speaks with one voice to the rest of the world, the stronger the bargaining position is for little folks. Because we really are the David and Goliath thing. I don't want to go up against, Archer Daniels Midland or Dreyfus or any of these seed companies or genetics behemoths. I mean, I'd put on a button-down shirt and do the Zoom with the tie, Jerry Garcia tie. But, I can stand my ground. But geez, man, these are powerful companies. but they need us. If you accept the fact that they need us more than we need them, we'll do it ourselves. It might be slow, but we're not going to give you our genetics. You can go try and scare up something, but the nice thing is that the cannabis and hemp crowd has a head start. We assume that the big folks have skunk work projects. They've got at least people watching and monitoring and, say, industrial espionage. They know what the game is. They're not at the table yet, but when they do, it will be a dent in the gravitational waves. I mean, they're going to be a force. I think Tilray got a bargain when they bought the Manitoba hemp farmers. They were retired guys who came back to show how it was done. And I looked at the price and it's like, dude, all the hemp we eat in the US comes out of Manitoba. It might be labeled differently if it's a Trader Joe's or Whole Foods, but you know, you flip it over and look at it, it's the same product. Tilray got a bargain. I don't, and good for them, but the farmers, they didn't need the money. They were older when they came in, but geez, man, don't let that happen to you folks, So you're right. Education on the part of the cannabis hemp community levels the playing field as best as possible.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for the conversation today, Jerry. That was what I hoped I'd hear. Because it's just that, I've known you for a long time, and I just love the way you merged your past life with your activist life, with the life with your kids, with cannabis, and it just created this really holistic, healthy information sharing ability. And that's how I've always seen you. And so I just wanted to say thank you for just being you, and thank you for taking the time today to break this down, because we do need the assistance, because so few of us have ever worked in this particular space.
Right.
And it's trying to learn how we can all get educated so that there's no individual that was picked on, so to speak, because they didn't have the support or the understanding. And that way, what you're able to do is the community creates the support system. It allows there to be standards, and it allows there to be precedent, so that when individuals enter the space, there's already some idea of expectation and behavior, and they're not coming in so uninitiated and working with hope and prayer and faith in those that aren't praying or hoping and aren't there. So thank you so much for the conversation, and I will
write something up, because I really do want people to climb on my shoulders and make different mistakes. Because, there were times I remember being introduced by a breeder who I really respect. And he found a sugar daddy who was going to float his boat. And we were all going to go to, I believe, NOCO or one of the trade shows in Denver. And there was a phone call. It might have been the day I was going to catch a red eye. And the money guy took over the conversation and really bullied me hard. I'm a pretty strong individual, but I said, I'm not going to Denver. I'm not going to meet you. When I hung up, I broke into tears. It really struck hard. So I'm the first to admit that I've lost and I've won. And I think that experience of having some Wall Street person, to be polite, make me cry at the bullying. I'm not ashamed of it, but I want other people to learn that's okay. You need to walk away. You need to stand up for yourself, and the community needs to stand shoulder to shoulder, because the strength comes from having a united front, because you're going to go up against some big folks with big checking accounts and gnarly lawyers. So thank you for getting me to think in these ways, and I will scribble something and share it with the world, because we need to do it. We need to do it together, and we need to do it on our terms.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Much love, Jerry.
Always a pleasure.